going back and forth with Steve here.
We're live. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our first board meeting of the year. Today is not June. It is January. I kind of wish it were June now. January 5th, 2021. Let's start by indicating who's here, beginning with Terry.
Terry Bodden.
Julie Jackson.
Connie Burgess.
Nicole McDermott. Chris Wynn.
Clark Nelson.
Martin Bates, Superintendent.
Karen Winder, Board President. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our pledge. And Rick Anthony is going to lead us in that. If you want to come on up, Rick.
The audience will please rise for the pledge and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rick. Right, next we're going to have our reverence, and we'll turn the time over to Ben Horsley.
Pardon me while I set this up real quick. If I don't do the steps exactly right, then I'm in trouble. So we have been doing some electronic videos of some of our student activities. Tonight we'll be pleased to hear from the Taylorsville High School Madrigal program. And when this was originally solicited, we were still kind of coming up to the holidays, and they gave us a nice Christmas song to enjoy. So keep your merry season bright. We will continue with some of those holiday selections with the Taylorsville High Madrigals. No. Okay, something's wrong here. I know what's wrong. Go up to my. All right, let's try that again.
I think we can clap. Ben, you'll let Leah know how much we appreciate that. Thank you.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Taylorsville Madrigals. It just warms my heart that even in the midst of a global pandemic, we're finding ways to do normal things in different ways. And so singing with masks is probably not fun for them, but they're willing to don the mask and in order to be able to still perform as a show choir. So good job, Taylorsville. Thank you for sharing that with us and for doing it. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda. Usually action items are at the end of the meeting. We're actually going to put this action item toward the beginning because it's an important one where we have board leadership elected for the next 2 years. So after every election cycle, so every 2 years, because we are up at different times, that's intentional, we choose our new board president and board vice president. So we'll start with board president first, and so I will entertain a motion.
I move that Karen Winder be president of the Board of Education for the Granite School District for the next 2 years.
All right, thank you. Because this involves me,
You get a second?
not yet. So because this involves me, I'm going to turn the rest of this action item over to my vice president, Connie.
Can we have a second on that?
I'll second.
Thank you. So now we have a motion to nominate Karen as president of the board. So I'd like us to vote on that now. All in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay, Karen, you are
Thank you,
it.
Connie, for doing that. And thanks for the trust board members that you have in me. Next, we'll elect I'll entertain a motion for our board vice president.
I motion that we nominate Nicole McDermott, had to think, as vice president of our board.
Right? Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Right, we have a motion and a second on the table to have Nicole McDermott serve as the board vice president for the Granite School District for the next 2 years. Any further questions, comments, concerns? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, both president and vice president pass unanimously. And I want to give a special, while we do do-si-do and change of chairs, I want to, I want to tell Connie Burgess how much I've appreciated serving alongside her. She's been awesome. She has literally sat on my right side, been my right-hand gal. So I'll miss her. And we welcome Nicole.
Changed. It's terrible, but over the years, I have to have my chair.
Here's a secret fact. There's a piece of tape on Connie's chair and my chair. We're the only ones that have a piece of tape because we have our very specific chairs. So that's kind of the joke between both of us.
We do not. And don't try to take Connie's chair. Oh. They adjust, see? And once you got it right, you don't.
Once you get the height right.
Yeah. All right. We don't have any, I don't think we have any mayors here in our presence, and we don't have anyone signed up for citizen participation. So we'll move next to the consent agenda. Normally I can say that we've had this since Thursday, but we've had this since last year. So last December or something, it was sent out before our winter break. And so we've had weeks to review that consent agenda, not just a weekend. So board members, I'll entertain a motion.
I motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion on the table to approve the consent agenda and a second. Any questions, concerns from board members regarding consent agenda items? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right. Next, we'll turn the time over to Martin so he can introduce our information item.
Thank you. Dr. Aaron Wilson, you come forward. Board members, somewhat more than a year ago, several years ago, we chose as a board and district to designate Granger High School as a Title I school. It qualified, and we had the ability at the time, the discretion at the time, to designate a high school as a Title I school, and the resources have been going to Granger High for a number of years. Last year, Cottonwood High School met the same criteria, and so we had a lengthy conversation. Many of you will remember that we need to treat similarly situated schools the same, and so if we were going to continue to have Granger High School be a Title I high school, then Cottonwood High School would need to be a Title I high school as well. And that's a great opportunity. It provided a real opportunity. The challenge that's faced is that our Title I allocation from the state does not increase, simply based on whether or not we designate an additional school as a Title I school. And so there were Title I funds that were reduced from our other Title I schools in order to be able to have Cottonwood High School become a Title I school. Again, that was contingent on us determining that Granger High School would be a Title I school as well. So I want to say about this time last year, the board, having heard from a number of schools that had lost funds in order that Cottonwood High could be added to the ranks of Title I school, you asked that we come back to you this January, the middle of this current school year, to give a report so that the board could consider and revisit that decision to have Title I high schools at all. And so Aaron has been, I don't want to say lucky, because he wasn't lucky. He applied for and competed and was the best candidate for the position that he now holds. But that gives him the opportunity to present that report to you, board members. This is an information item, but at the conclusion, we'll be looking to you whether we want to come back with action or not regarding that. So Aaron, turn the time over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, Granite District Board. So I have a presentation that Ben is pulling up, and we'll make sure my clicker works.
Now, Aaron, can you just get that microphone right up there
Yes.
so people can hear? Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, my clicker works. We're all good. So as Dr. Bates said, the question at hand is essentially, where is it best to allocate Title I funding? My goal initially in this presentation is to describe some of the rule sets that we need to play within in determining which Title I schools we allocate and where we can't make decisions under federal statute. So the question is, should we take Title I funding away or from the high school level that would increase the per pupil allocation or increase the number of schools served in elementary? And Dr. Bates stated that very well. So first, a review of essentially how Title I school allocations are determined. We essentially, that's true, we have a fixed amount of money each year, and by adding schools, that doesn't increase our pot of money that we have to give. And we have some flexibility within Title I regulations. So first, we decide as an LEA how many eligible schools that we will qualify, and we must rank them in rank order according to their poverty level. But the discretion we have following that rule is, where do we cut that list of schools off? We can choose where to do that. Second, the regulation allows, and actually the federal government encourages the use of stratified funding bands for Title I allocations. This is like a progressive tax code. And so the most impoverished schools can receive a higher per pupil allocation. The next most at-risk band receives a lower allocation, and so on. And then our third and last point of choice in determining Title I schools is the poverty data we choose to use to determine the eligibility of high schools. The nuance here is we as a district can choose to use the high school's true or own free reduced lunch percentage, meaning for the high school students themselves, did they apply and receive free reduced lunch status? Or we can use an option, it's called projected feeder school pattern. In essence, we can use the data of the high school's elementary schools and project that onto the high school. And depending on which option we choose, that can drastically change the rank order of schools. So for some context, we have in the state of Utah 198 high schools that are either public or charter. And 133 of them could be eligible for Title I funding, yet only 11 high schools are Title I in the state of Utah, 2 of which reside in our district. So that's a review of how Title I, we can decide which schools are Title I.
Aaron, let's pause there and make sure
Sure.
everybody,
No,
there's a lot of,
I have questions.
there's
Yes.
a lot of information right there.
Yes.
Please.
So in our school district, our Granger and Commonwealth, the only 2 high schools that do qualify. There isn't one that qualifies out there that isn't receiving Title I funding at this point.
So I'm going to be guilty of talking a lot. We have 91 schools in Granite. We could extend the rank order as far as I think 49. So if we wanted to really spread and everyone gets just a tiny bit of federal money, then more high schools could qualify, but they
Right.
would be much lower on that list. So right now we serve 28 schools, 2 of which are high schools.
Aaron, can I jump
Yeah.
in and
That
talk
was a
a
good-
little bit from a state perspective for a minute?
Sure.
Now, help me. It seems that under the federal law, if a school has 40% or more free or reduced lunch, they can theoretically qualify.
Correct.
Now, Granite, we've got a lot of schools in Granite that are at that 40%. But our allocation, again, the state gets a Title I allocation, and then that's divvied up from the state. Now, we're about 10% of the state in terms of our student population. We get about 20% of the state's Title I money, which speaks to the level of poverty that we have in the state. Now, we, of course, lobby for 30% of the state's Title I money, but that doesn't go over very well with the other districts. And so we have the 20%. That's about that's where we've been really for many years. But then this board has discussed this a number of times over the last couple of decades, several decades. If we dilute the allocation too much, then we can't really do much with it. And so we've moved that, and Connie's over here nodding. I can see her out of the corner of my eye. We've moved how many elementary schools, for example. For a long time, we had 19 Title I elementary schools. And where we could have had 60. Well, probably not, but 40 some odd.
Right.
And so a few years ago, we moved that 19, we redistributed our pie and went from 19, I want to say, to 25. And so that number's been back and forth a little bit. Across the state, there are all kinds of Title I schools because the demographics are different in those districts. Where a school with 45% free and reduced lunch is a Title I school. Well, the schools in Granite with 45% free and reduced lunch, they're not Title I schools for a long time because we have such a higher relative impact in terms of poverty. So,
Excellent.
did that capture some of what you're?
Hugely.
When was it that it went from 19 to 25?
6-7 years ago.
Many years ago.
It was 6 years ago. It was when I was a brand new board member 6 years ago. That was one of my first votes, is to expand that. So that would have been January 2015 ish. So don't quote me on the month, but it was fairly close to that timing.
Yeah, I begged for a long time. So Aaron, I have a question on what you're using for the high school then. Are we using those elementary
Correct.
schools?
And that's, yes, and that's
Okay.
kind of a crux of the decision to make board, to address both questions. Recall the first thing we need to do is to decide where that cutoff point is, where the biggest bang is for our buck. Now, this high school feeder projection that we decide to use, I'll mention later, is rarely used, is not very often used. nationwide, but we decide to do that. And if we were going to say to our high schools, we're not discriminating against any school, but we're only going to we're only going to have schools use their true free reduced lunch percentage, then those high schools would, in essence, drop out of that ranking, that ordered ranking. And so that's this third point speaks to all of these questions and the matter at hand, to be honest.
And true's a difficult word the way you just used it.
Yes.
Because when you've got when the elementary schools in a feeder pattern have 90+% free and reduced lunch, the junior highs in the feeder pattern have 90+% free and reduced lunch, and the high school has 45%, that suggests that kids that are eligible are not applying. And that's why we determined
Correct.
some years ago to use this different computation, that of the feeder patterns to be the one
Yes.
to make that determination.
Quick question. I just want to make sure I have this clear. I was told that to qualify for free and reduced lunch, you also have to be U.S. citizens. So if they are not, they cannot qualify for it. Is that true?
So I don't want to misspeak, but there's many ways to determine poverty. And the next slide, and I'll partially address your question, because of the poverty level in Cottonwood High School includes not just generational, but refugee poverty, speaking to the populations you've described. Cottonwood High School, the junior high and some of the elementaries in that network received a community eligibility program. So it essentially counts all of those schools as 100% free reduced lunch. So it kind of bypasses the issue of schools not receiving that funding. So I believe what you're saying is accurate, but fortunately for a pocket of students in Granite, because of this grant, that's in essence a non-issue. So.
Can you, okay, so, I understand there's a pot of money. We draw the line as to where, what percentage free and reduced, where that line
Correct.
is. Can you tell me where that line is percentage-wise? Do you have a ballpark figure?
60%.
Yeah.
Where it,
Right around
so it is
right around-
right at 60.
Correct.
Now, are you going to be going through later in this, tell us what the next few schools are going to be if we chose to go that direction? Do you have that data prepared to share with us tonight?
I have I have a previous version that was much longer, and I pared some down.
We went
So-
from 102 slides to 27.
Yes.
So
Well, and we can let you get through your slides and save our
and
questions.
I'd be
That's
happy to answer
fine.
that question. A nuance there is because Title I funding is based off of free and reduced lunch percentages, those percentages fluctuate year to year within communities.
Yeah.
And so that next 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 schools, they can change, sometimes surprisingly so. And this current year is so interesting. The percentages changed to what we have seen historically because all families receive free lunch this year. And so this year would be not as telling as looking through historically. And so I'd be happy to, do some further research. on
Okay,
that.
perfect. You can continue on.
I actually had one more question on this slide. Oh, go ahead.
Just really quickly, a comment I want to put out there too, and we talked about this last year, and it's not in the slide deck, but on the horizon, when we think of high schools qualifying and using the free and reduced of the feeders to determine that, Kearns High is next on the horizon. So as the feeders of Kearns High, the elementaries at Kearns High, many of which are Title I, as the free and reduced is increased there, Kearns High jumps up as a horizon high school that would qualify according to our rule set.
Correct. That would be one of the next rank ordered
Julie, you had a
schools.
question?
So yes, on number 2, I think it just didn't sink in.
So,
I guess I need to understand what a stratified funding band
yes.
is.
So what that is, let's take our 27, 28 Title I schools. The first 6 or 7 are very different than the bottom of the list. And so nationally, it is allowed and encouraged to take that top band of schools, meaning the most impoverished, and say, you know what, we're going to give the school $890 per student. And then the district notices, well, gosh, this next band, their needs are a little different. The depth of poverty isn't as much in the community. So we're going to give the school $750 per student. And so that is, in the federal manuals I see, that's an encouraged practice to not just account for the percentage, but in essence, the depth of poverty.
And that's what the stratified funding band is.
Correct.
Okay.
The,
Thanks.
the per pupil allocation is an important moving part to this.
Right.
Because if it becomes an economy of scale depending on how many students are in your school as to what you can do with the funding. So if you're in a really small school and you're even in that highest band, you still don't have quite enough money to do perhaps some of the things that a larger school could just because of the number of students they have.
Very good.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay,
Go
thank
ahead.
you, board. Excellent questions. I hope my clicker is still working with me. I think it fell asleep. Thank you, Ben. So a review was mentioned. There was when we were talking initially about whether to fund Cottonwood High School, I highlighted here some points that should be reviewed. Bullet point 1 is really already mentioned, but the Granite Park Junior High Network opted into that community eligibility program, and which allowed all of the students in those schools to be considered free lunch recipients, and what a benefit it is to those communities. But as a result, the free reduced lunch percentage of those schools became higher, one could argue artificially high. And so where we choose to use the projected feeder pattern option to fund or to designate high schools, that really changed the percentage of Cottonwood High, and it put them in that ranking. And so that's very salient to our conversation and decision. Second point of review is now with Cottonwood High School being designated as Title I, now 1.7 million of the total 9 million available to schools goes to those 2 high schools, which is roughly 19%. And then with that $1.7 million, that fixed 1.7, if we did not qualify those high schools, that would mean additional elementary schools being added, or an option would be leaving the same number of elementary schools and simply increasing the PPA that Rick mentioned, giving them more funding to use.
So, Rick, you mentioned Kearns High is on the horizon.
And I thought it may have been Hunter. I'm not 100%. Okay.
One of them's on, okay.
Most importantly, another high school.
Another high school.
Right.
If we choose to keep the high schools in the mix, does that mean that new high school will go on this year?
No, not this year. By horizon, I mean, there's
Okay.
some concern that will come about.
Yeah, all right.
Is it correct that the proportion of that $1.7 million is not split equally between Granger and Cottonwood, given
Thank
that the
you.
size of Granger is much
That is
higher
correct.
than
Yes. But between the two.
Along those lines too, I remember having this conversation last year, and I came into this conversation thinking, well, that's not a big deal. Let's just reduce the per pupil at the high school and to make it smaller, still somewhat effective, but smaller, and then we can spread out the money elsewhere. What I learned that discussion was that the numbers you see now, that 1%, it is the minimum per pupil amount allowed at a high school level.
Correct.
So there's no way to reduce that 1.7. I just want to make sure we're all understanding that aspect, that piece of data. Is because I just thought, oh, well, 1.7, we'll just reduce it to $500,000, give them each $250,000, and that's good. But we
Right.
actually cannot, we are restricted to a minimum PPU with Title I funds, and that 1.7, we're already at the minimum amount.
That is correct. Yeah.
However, as you, looking at 2 schools taking in 19% of the funding, I also say, but is it also 19% of the population of kids who are receiving the funding? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
True. There are more students in a high school than in a small elementary. And so there's some scale there. And the question that we grapple with later is not only that, but well, is it proportionate by student? but also it really begs the question, is the money spent better at younger ages versus older ages? So and that's another lens to consider.
Really the two competing philosophies, if you will, is one, does poverty go away when a kid turns 14 and goes to high school? And the answer is clearly no, which is the direction we went some years ago. The other question is then, in retrospect, when we analyze that, is money better invested in the younger kids or in the older kids? And there's tension between those two values.
I think in addition to that, Martin, there's also kids that move in to our state and to our country who were not here to receive those services when they were in elementary school.
Absolutely, that's right.
So refugees and English language learners that have never been here before are receiving such services for the first time.
Right.
And that weighs on both values.
Yeah. Thank you. So as Dr. Bates mentioned, two arguments or two philosophies. One is the K-8 only argument. And I mentioned K-8 rather than K-6 because in terms of the federal government, really elementary schools and junior high schools are lumped together in terms of funding and accountability. And so that one argument is, well, the earlier you provide an intervention, the more time these resources can come to fruition and mitigate poverty, right? That's one train of thought. But then the other is saying, well, poverty doesn't go away. You can't just fix poverty once students reach high school, and it continues, and there's still substantial needs when students come to a high school. And one thing I was tasked with is to see what research states and take a lens through our own district. And so I hope that in the next few slides I can contribute to these questions. Oh, I apologize. Thank you. So after Cottonwood's designation, Cottonwood High students, they now have more supports to address the high pockets of poverty that exist among the student body. And then teachers have more resources at their disposal in closing achievement gaps. And there's other benefits as well. And as was mentioned in the introduction to this, Title I elementary schools, they lost funding, and that, depending on a number of factors, whether it was their school size, whether they at the same time had some type of reconfiguration, and this one high school, they lost at the lowest amount $7,000, at the highest $148,000. And so in some cases, principals at these schools reported that there was not enough funding to maintain Title I professionals and other things to which they use to serve and help their students. So the question at hand is it better to focus Title I funding on elementary schools or to include these high schools? And that's the framework today.
Can I ask you, Aaron, are those losses specific to feeder schools within the Cottonwood network or throughout the district?
It was throughout the district, although some may have been in the Cottonwood network. I'd have to look. Thank you.
I also wondered, here we're saying that they didn't have funds to maintain their Title I paraprofessionals. What other things does this money, what other things is it spent on?
So Title I funding is, well, I actually have a pie chart in an upcoming slide.
We'll wait for it.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So looking at nationwide data, research doesn't kind of pit an argument against, well, is it better to invest earlier or later in people? But there we do have some data to show what other districts use. And so on the left of this slide right here, I have findings from the Department of Education, and then on the right, I've mirrored that format with information from our own Granite schools, and then formatted it this way for ease of comparison. And so we find that the high school feeder pattern projections that we use are rarely used nationwide, and we use that model so that we can fund Granger, Cottonwood, or any that would qualify using those projected feeder patterns. Then the second line is we find that nationwide and in Granite, our data is fairly similar. 57% of students live in poverty. in elementary schools, and then in Granite it's 57.38. So we find some good baseline there. And then the third line is nationwide elementary students receive 76% of available Title I money. And in Granite, our elementary students receive 66% of available Title I money to schools. So anticipating a question, if we were to decide, you know what, let's not allow the feeder pattern projection and in essence not qualifying Granger and Cottonwood, that number would move from 66% to about 80%, more in line and slightly higher than the national average. I'll pause for any questions on this slide. Okay. So if we do not allocate Title I funds to high schools, we could increase the Title I per pupil allocation in elementary and junior high schools. Right now, the average is 773 per pupil, and that would increase to an average of 1,010.
And that average is a reflection of the stratification that we were
Correct.
talking about before.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Sorry, does that average take it up, I'm assuming, higher than it was because if we did absorb Granger and Cottonwood back in, that would increase it even more than it was before, correct?
So I think I understand your question, but so in essence, right now our average is 773, but without funding Cottonwood and Granger with that fixed pot of money, yes, it would increase on average to 110.
What was it before we funded Cottonwood
So
last
right
year?
now the average is 773 currently.
Do you know what it was last
2
year?
years. Yeah,
2 years
2
ago?
years.
No, I apologize.
That's a difficult one because every year it sort of changes depending on how many pupils at
state
schools, et
and the
cetera.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's never a lock 773 every year. It's always varies a little bit. And it can vary depending on what the state allocates to us.
About this time every year, the state gives us the next year's allocation, and we rerun all of the numbers based on that. And that moves for curious reasons, like census data that from 10 years ago. So as this new census data comes into play, all kinds of numbers could move, and we just don't know what those are going to be.
So what month do we get? What month do we find out those numbers?
My first year as a Title I principal, it was like the school had already started. So it can vary depending on the political winds that blow federally. So I think March is usually by March we get it, but not always. So.
And you're saying in this slide that we would either be able to do the first thing or the second thing,
Or mix it.
Or mixed.
or a
So,
combination. Okay.
Correct. So it could be the case that it's decided to fund 2 or 3 additional schools, which would fund additional schools and increase the average PPA.
Right.
So it's not an either or here. Okay. Very good. So how funding is used in the elementary schools. So again, we have over 20 Title I elementary schools. And this data that I extracted here was based off of the 2018-19 year, simply because the 1920 was such an unusual year. I felt that wouldn't be a true reflection of spending. And here we find that teacher salaries, inclusive, and then the other side of that is benefits. So most of the allocation is spent on contract folks, people in the building. And then you'll find paraeducators paying teachers hourly to provide interventions. But this is reflective. Now, no one school is exactly like this, but if you aggregate all of Title I elementary schools, this is how the monies are spent categorically.
So with teacher salary, is it mostly used to help reduce class size?
Yes, when it teacher salaries, yes.
Okay.
Where, yes.
Are any of those additional, like either like doing a vice principal half-time, bumping him to full-time, or are they just teacher?
So in the other 6%, I believe there may have been an odd, maybe one school or so, but if it is, it would have appeared in that other 6%.
The other, okay.
Yeah.
And can you just give me some scale on this? Like in a normal 400, pupil elementary, I mean, is this 2 teachers? Is it 3 teachers?
Good question.
I know that
Leslie,
I'm asking a
Leslie,
really hypothetical, but
Elementary.
Yeah, and Donna could speak to this, because we staff elementaries at 0.5 increments. Usually what a Title I principal will do is save themselves from going down a 0.5. They'll use some Title I money to make that a whole FTE.
okay.
Typically.
So you're not looking at 2 or 3 teachers.
No.
You're looking at just kind of saving a position.
Correct. But remember, depending on the size of your elementary school, like a Granger Elementary, they probably fund 2-3 FTE. But a South Kearns, it's maybe a 0.5 and might not even be enough of a PPA allocation to be able to do that.
Okay.
Very good. And I also included categorical spending for our, at the time, one Title I high school. And the categories here are, there's more in a smaller increments, but again, you're thinking of about $1 million here. And so the amounts, the percentage represents a bigger amount than the elementary would per school. You'll find that they spend between elementary and high school roughly the same percentage on people, but the elementaries use more of the percentage for classroom teachers, where high school there's other uses designated here. Okay.
So let me say what I think I just heard you say.
Yes.
They lower the adult to student ratio about the same, but in high schools there are different titles for the adults than there are in the elementaries.
True. Where yes, so a guidance counselor wouldn't be a position at an elementary school, and so on.
Okay.
And this entire budget is determined by, the spending is determined by the principal.
Correct. And my job is to make sure there's compliance, and their accountability director is that work together as a team to make sure that it reaches their goals to mitigate the effects of poverty. But that
Right.
the strategies could differ from elementary to high school.
So they have to justify their strategy.
Correct.
Talk about that for just a minute. How a school puts a Title I plan together, who approves that? How's that created?
Good.
And
Who's also on the team? Because I know
Yes.
principals have final say, but they do tap into a lot of their staff. So
Yes.
if you could kind of say who's included in
Absolutely.
that.
So the beginnings of a Title I plan start with a needs assessment. So a review of data, and integral to that team are teachers, parents, community members. Oftentimes the community council serves as that body to help generate this plan. And then based off of the school data, that the most critical needs, then they'll say, well, gosh, we have these types of academic concerns. At an elementary, it might be our kindergartners are coming in below early literacy levels, and so they might decide to lower class sizes in the early grade levels, increase reading coaching as examples. Now, the process of getting a plan approved, it goes through those stakeholder team, and then they say, these are our needs. This is how we're going to use Title I funding to close this achievement gap. And then myself and their school accountability directors have some oversight in that. And ultimately, I make sure that it's compliant, that they're spending it in federally appropriate ways, and then speak to some, I give ideas and saying, well, I noticed that you had this need. This other school had a similar type of need, but they included this strategy. So we try to cross-pollinate ideas so that they really use the money for the best purposes to reach their goals. So that's about the process and the different roles and district support that helps that principal team in generating ideas, making sure it's fiscally sound and compliant. And then once approved, then they can begin spending according to their plan.
Thank you for that.
Yes. So a question I was asked to address is, to what degree does Title I funding alone influence or correlate with student achievement? And so we will first look at Granger High School and then ask the same question for a group of elementary schools.
Actually, before you do that, just
Yes.
one more question. Not one more, just another question. So in the total budget of, say, an elementary school, what percentage of the budget is this? I'm thinking it's like 1%.
Is what? I'm sorry.
It's like 1%. This is a very small part of our budget. Is this right?
Of the
entire
school's budget, yes. But of the school's discretionary budget, it's huge.
Can you define huge? Majority? More than
Well,
50?
Okay.
Percent?
I'm not sure exactly what question you're asking, so let me try and answer it this way a little bit. Schools don't worry at all about how much their teachers cost. Sometimes we hear people say, well, I've got a master's degree, so the school didn't hire me because I cost too much. That's just not on our school's radars. In Granite, we give you an FTE and you can hire a doctorate with 20 years, or you can hire a brand new teacher. There's no benefit or cost to the school. That's just covered by, you could ask a school what their budget is. They have no idea because they don't pay. The most expensive part of a school is the people, and they don't pay that bill. The next most expensive part is the utility. They don't pay that bill. That's all taken care of. So what a principal has in their budget that they have to spend, an elementary principal has very few discretionary pots to spend. I mean, they get some capital money and they can do, they can spend that on what they want, or they get, but really they have some discretionary money, but they don't collect fees. They don't have, really, an elementary school has trust lands money and or Title I money. And then TSSA is a small piece of that. Those are the discretionary funds. So in elementary school, they used to say, and help me, if they had a $500 fundraiser from the PTA, they were pretty tickled because they got a lot of money. $500 was a lot of money. So when we go to a Title I school and say, you're going to get $770 per pupil, that's a lot of money. That's huge to a Title I school.
Now, compare that though to high school, because a high school, take Granger or Cottonwood, Granger's at 3,000. So their TSSA, between TSSA and Land Trust, they have somewhere around $700,000 to spend, whereas an elementary school might have 35,000 from TSSA.
Yeah, and again, because that's PPA.
Right.
TSSA is allocated on a per pupil allocation, so is Land Trust as well.
So to say that budget for high school, that's more like 50%, whereas for an elementary school, that's like 300% more than what their normal budget is. So it depends on the size of the school, right? Is that a fair representation?
Is that getting to absolutely, the size, because of the per pupil. And that's a conversation we've had and will have again. There's a poke in the eye of small schools because they get per pupil allocations that they can't do anything with, which is its own problem. Are we getting to the question that you're asking?
Huge. Very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
That's the technical definition of huge.
I'll always ask for the technical definition.
Well, good. And what is not difficult, but interesting to compare elementaries and high schools. They both receive letter grades and accountability on the state system, but the categories by which they are assessed include different things. So we see how high school grades are calculated here. Their indicators include student proficiency, growth, ELL progress, growth of the lowest 25%, graduation, ACT, and students participating in advanced coursework.
Aaron,
yes.
I'm going to interrupt for just a second. It's just for everybody's benefit.
Sure.
The questions that Aaron's answering in this presentation are the questions that board members have been asking us to respond to. And so one of the questions that he's been answering questions that you have asked. To this question is, really the question is, show us the academic difference that Title I money what difference is Title I money making in terms of academic achievement? And what Aaron's saying is, that's a really hard question to answer, so let me try and get at it from the side.
Yes. I need to carry you around with me, Dr. Bates. You are an excellent interpreter, and I appreciate you. And so that's correct. Oh, sorry.
So
Connie.
I just have a question. When you say high school grades, is this what the state uses to?
Correct. This
to
is the
put
state accountability
a grade
system.
on a school?
Yes. So elementary schools and high schools are judged somewhat differently. In essence, if you remove those purple categories, then that's how an elementary school is graded. So there's more at play for a high school, the closer they get to graduation. And so looking now at Granger High School, I want to commend Dr. Dunn for the great work he has done and his wonderful team at Granger. And notice that their graduation rate trends are increasing over time. Now, they had received Title I funding in 2013 and 2014. By that time, they had already increased their graduation rate by 15%. If you look at the lowest point to the highest point prior to 13-14, that's a huge jump. And then they received Title I funding, and then that path had continued. And so I want to commend Dr. Dunn, and I think he shared this slide, or excuse me, Mitch Durden shared this slide or slides similar to it in highlighting the work they've done with graduation. Now, what I want to also show here, I'm going to go back one more. So the piece of the pie here, the purple one, high school graduation, this is high school graduation over time. So one of those 6 components. And then look at holistically considering the whole pie. Now you'll notice a drop between 13 and 14. That's not reflective of anything bad at Granger. That's when the state recalibrated how grades were calculated. And so the percentage is percentage of points on the state accountability system. So I'd almost invite us to ignore the drop. But then as we look from 2013-14, that would have been the first year that Title I funding was available. We see throughout time the percentages on the state accountability system, all of the points in aggregate for Granger High School.
And 2013-14 was when Granger opened. And also, wasn't it the new school as well as ninth grade being included for the first time?
Oh, and I can't
That could
speak
be,
to that.
yes.
Is that
I
right?
believe so.
Yep.
I believe 13-14 is Granger opening, ninth grade moving up all together.
And Title I funding, so a confluence of,
Yeah.
of
That's
many
That's
things.
right. Title I funding corresponded with the ninth grade coming. We did
Okay.
that at the same time. That's
Very
right.
good. Very good. So let me now look at this graph. I'll pause it so we don't get too dizzy. But what this represents here, and the reason I include this is to show among a group of elementary school, Title I elementary schools, I hope it pauses here. I think it'll
Yeah,
pause.
me too.
It just likes
Okay.
going
Oh.
and going.
I apologize on my, well, divert your eyes, I guess. So what this slide is, it's similar to the Granger slide, and picture, instead of just looking the accountability over time for one school, it superimposes the most at-risk Title I elementary schools under that same time span. And the take-home message here is school grading and accountability is very dynamic and related to many factors. I'm going to advance this slide, and I apologize I couldn't pause it like I intended to.
We have it here holding still, so let us
Okay.
look at it for just a second.
I'll ask a question while we're looking and pondering.
Okay.
So am I oversimplifying things when I say, or when I observe that Granger's graduation rate is on a significant upward trend, but this state point system is all over the map and hard to interpret? It seems like when we look at overall objectives and the objectives of the board and of the district, which is to raise graduation rate, isn't that the rate we should be looking at?
I would argue it's one of the metrics we should be looking at, but all of the pieces that come into play with the state accountability model, I think, have valid areas. ACT, performance of English language learners, all of those things are important metrics. We could debate maybe graduation rate should actually be 40% of that metric around student achievement at the school, but each of those pieces do have an important role in overall student achievement. Does that answer your question, Clark, or
Yeah,
provide?
I think so. I mean, I'm just trying to decide if I like the really simplistic approach of graduation rate or
Yeah,
how much weighting you should give these other accountability points.
Yeah, and this kind of, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but it kind of takes us down, it could take us down a rabbit hole around measurements of student achievement and what should those be and how should those look? And even we could go down the rabbit hole of social emotional learning versus academic achievement and how much are those even intertwined, et cetera. It gets really complex and a lot of different opinions or different feelings and beliefs. The graduation rate is affected by passing or failing courses. And we even question some of the methodologies around that when it comes to credit recovery, when it comes to proficiency and proficiency-based grading versus cans of string beans turned in, et cetera. It gets really complex in determining what we believe student achievement is and how we want to measure that. What metrics do we want to use? The state, I would argue the state does as good of job as out there as of anyone in trying to be very holistic and in trying to consider every aspect. The way that they have designed the student accountability system and the percentages does have its critics, but also in their defense, I think no one has been able to come up with a better way, and they have involved a lot of different stakeholders in designing of that measurement.
Well, and to me, keeping in mind also that graduation only involves one grade, whereas you need to grade a school on every single 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So while graduation is important, if they drop out in 9th grade, that doesn't even matter. So making sure that that growth and that proficiency happens every single grade.
And there's grades and there's grades. I agreed with about 95% of what Rick just said, because I don't think our state's letter grade system is helpful at all. Okay, but I think evaluating this for all of these factors for any school, this kind of a dashboard, I think that can be very helpful. But to say at the end of the day, because of this, it's an A school or an F school, I don't find what we find there is that this system does a great job in terms of the letter grade for a school in tracking the socioeconomic status of a school. It doesn't tell us anything about the education that's going on. Now, proficiency and growth, when we look closely at those by school, that tells us a lot about what's going on in the school. And so to that extent.
Yeah, and it depends how you come at it, how you come at accountability and measurement. Do you come at it as, here's where I'm at, and that gives me great feedback on what we need to be working on and influencing how we make decisions and how we want to improve? Or do you come at it from accountability as a stick to shame you and say you're bad? Right. And I choose to come at it from, okay, this is feedback and let's design a plan based on that. And in that sense,
it's as good as any system anywhere.
Correct. I believe so.
So with that, from your perspective, collectively or individually, how do you interpret the graph that was moving year by year?
So for me, you'll notice there's a wide variance of performance between schools and among an individual or by an individual school over time, right? And so when you look at not just those groups that were their most impoverished, but all of them, some stand out as always at the top, being exemplary. Some, there's this huge spike and something happened, and I superimpose that with money. Did that correlate with an increase of money? And the next portion of this, which I'll lead to, is saying, money alone isn't the answer, because you see these dramatic strikes up when we took away a little money, right? And so there's other factors at play. That was, to me, the biggest takeaway, that there's some very important human capital factors that I think should be the focus of student achievement far before we focus on the money aspect. There's some foundational things. I don't know that many schools are at the place now where we can invest and expect that return, because we need to invest a little bit more in the human capital side. That was an answer to your question, board member. That was a takeaway that I had from that exercise.
I mean, to put it in just very blunt words, you could have a new administration enter a school with less Title I funds, and for whatever reason, they click better with their faculty. And so all of a sudden you're going to see performance go up, even though money has gone down. But obviously they would always welcome more money if that's the conclusion
correct.
that we came to. So these kinds of charts are tricky because we're not seeing all variables.
Yes.
That's precisely his
And
point.
that's, I
Yeah.
think, what you're tapping into, but also, I think board members are seeing those zigzag lines. And, I even leaned over and I said, wow, the Roosevelt shot up, but look at or Redwood Elementary, they've just gone down. So I think it's really hard to just say it's money.
And that's the point. It's not money alone. There's some foundational human capital factors that are more important. And yes, there isn't a principal out there that wouldn't want more money. I think the next slide, the next two slides, will be very interesting. It represents research done for my department over the last several months. We never do research by, we're going to see what happens when we take away money. Let's do an experiment. We never do that. But retrospectively, we can look and see the result when there's been natural ebbs and flows of funding. Well, what was the result? And so in the past 10 years or so, we've seen 4 scenarios at play. The first, well, if a school has Title I money and they get more, what happens? And then the second scenario is, well, if a school has no Title I money and we give them money, what happens? So on with the loss, meaning they had Title I funding and it was taken away, and then the funding decrease. And so briefly, and this was about 20 slides that are beautifully condensed into one. A funding increase is when we give schools, when they have Title I funding and we give them more, which could be, for some context, we had one year in 12-13 where our allocation went up from 11.8 to 15 million. And so schools received 23 to 42% more money. And what we did is we compared their baseline achievement from the year prior to when they received that increase of 23 to 42%. Some schools' achievement went up, some schools stayed the same, some schools went down. And so there wasn't a correlation because there's many other factors at play that are a precursor to additional funding.
And are you using the same measurement of achievement for a high school as for an elementary here? Or how is this?
In that scenario, and the depth of that question was cut out in the missing slides, but in that scenario, in 12-13, we had not yet funded high schools. So that wasn't a part of that particular study or retrospective study.
Right, because I realize we're talking about correlation here and not causation, but which I think is an important distinction. But I would argue that there is a correlation for Granger High School over a longer term when you look at graduation rate as the measurement of achievement.
Sure.
So that's what. So when your conclusion here is no correlation, I'm curious what was examined, what was analyzed, high school, just elementaries and so forth.
And then that particular year, what we, for I suppose simplicity, is we had in essence every school getting significantly more in the same year. So we like to standardize that because we could isolate the variable of year, right? And so we didn't have that same benefit at a point in time after 12-13. But you're right, and you speak to some of the other many dynamics that come into that question. So thank you. Similarly, if we have a school that was not a Title I funding and we decided as a LEA to extend our ranking and add in schools, then that's significant. There's schools with no money that automatically have Title I funding, and you see those 3 scenarios at play. That in the short and long term, that there was a gain in student achievement, no gain, or even in some cases a moderate loss. That doesn't speak to Title I funding being bad. It just means that there's other factors at play that are more important than the money itself. Similarly, with funding loss, no correlation. And then anecdotally, one year, and this was in between the 16-17 and 17-18 school year, our district received 2.5 million less in Title I funding. And the result on the 27 Title I schools at the time, there was a smaller allocation received, and among the 23 schools, only 3 showed a decrease in 2 or more tested areas, 9 about the same, and 11 increased. So that to me was fascinating. And I can't, I
I've
don't know
gotta-
why.
I've got to make a plug here for Aaron's department. And that is, this is information that we've never been able to really crunch and spend time with because we haven't had the expertise, whether that's Aaron or the two folks that work with you.
Yes, Todd and Joan are excellent.
Our sense has been there's something not right. There's something going on here. And so we have invested, board, the last couple of years in his department, in this department. This used to be, there's a long history of Rob Averett and Mitch and so on, but we've not been able to really have, and nobody at the state board, they're not doing these kinds of analyses. And we thought this was important. We want to figure this out. And so we have invested significantly in a department that can really identify these kinds of problems and then now dig further. Now that's what the 102-page slide deck was. Aaron wanted to go try to say, no, that's not that's his last slide. I'm saying this completely lovingly, Aaron. Okay. I mean that his last slide was questions for further research. We said, that's not what the presentation's about, but I want you to do that research. You've got to do that research, and you've got the people and the resources to do that research so we can figure out what's really going on and what we can really do to improve. This shows there's something wrong and there's something right. And so what is it that we can do that we can then scale, not just in our Title I schools, but in all of our schools?
Right.
Apologize, that was a tangent.
Oh, thank you, Superintendent. And then to go on that bird walk a little bit further, we've loved the restructure that puts shoulder to shoulder me with our assessment director and organizational development. It's been a great collaboration. So we've enjoyed that, enjoying this department. So the takeaway here is there's money, and then there's human capital, which to define a little bit further, there's how we recruit and retain teachers and school leaders, how we monitor and influence their performance, and so many other factors. And those, like you said, are things that our department and others would want to explore more to kind of get at the heart of the phenomenon that we've seen in these retrospective studies. So briefly, I'll mention this. We opened the books. We opened the spending from the last decade of all of our Title I schools. And we looked at the top schools that are continually performing exemplary and above the regression lines for poverty and seem to be these wonderful positive outliers. And then we looked at the lowest performing schools. And what we found was they're spending their money categorically on the same things. And so speaking to that again, it's not about the money, it's other things are at play.
Yeah.
And so we thought that was an interesting thing. And like I said, we opened it for about 10 years. And while there was some slight variance, not notable enough to have any different conclusion. So I'll pause there and then continue on with that emphasis that it doesn't seem to be about the money. And I want to say money is important. We can do
Doesn't
more
seem to be
things
all
with it.
about the money.
It's not all about the money. There's precursors to having money have the effect on student achievement. So a pause for some implications and takeaways so far. School achievement is dynamic. It is related to many variables. Increasing or decreasing Title I funding alone does not have consistent effects on student achievement. And we've talked about some counterintuitive phenomenon that's taken place. The variable with the greatest impact on student achievement relates to human capital, namely the folks that are in your school and how effective they are at teaching kids, and the extent that schools purposely plan. There was a question earlier about how do Title I schools plan and make sure they're focusing money on the best needs. I want to be honest where I say I can do that better. My department can do better, and this exercise was helpful in shaping some future directions for supporting Title I schools. And then how do we build collective commitment and instructional capacity of those, not just in Title I, but all granite schools? I'll mention here that the principals of any Title I school assert that the Title I funding, it's integral to their ability to recruit and retain teachers. Not that those teachers get paid, more on their contract, but there's additional opportunities for training themselves, but also students in poverty tend to have achievement gaps, and there's more resources to help those teachers close those achievement gaps. And so anecdotally, I'll mention and add my experience as a principal as well, that funding does help. It's not only about the funding, but it does help with other things like recruitment and retention of effective teachers. So in answer to the question I was posed, what are the findings about how we spend money in Granite, particularly with Title I schools? And I was asked to give an opinion, rather, of if we had to choose between one side of the fence or the other. I'll first mention there's an economic principle called satisfice. And what it essentially says is, well, in absence of the best choice, the ideal choice, President Winder suggested is, you know what, if we could not give 1.7 to those high schools, but just a little bit, that would be the ideal choice, but we don't have that choice at our disposal. So choosing between the available options, the better of the two seems to be following the national trend of choosing to fund elementary schools. And it's not discriminating against high schools. It's saying we won't exercise that option to use a projected feeder pattern. We will serve schools in rank order of those patrons that apply and receive free lunch and base it off of that ranking, and then determine where the best cutoff is from there. So expressing my opinion, as I was invited to after this exercise, there's a lot more areas for research. That the slide isn't here, but there's more research to be done to make sure that the money we give to schools, any pot of money, is being spent most effectively. But salient to this presentation is I side with the K-8 argument. The earlier you provide intervention, the more time the resources come to fruition. And then, and that's my presentation. I'll offer some credits at the end, but I'll pause for questions.
All right, I know there's a variety of opinions on this. A year ago, there were quite a few varying opinions. So we'll open it up now for just a full discussion board. And then basically, you know, as we discuss and ask questions and listen to each other, at the end of the discussion, you know, we'll decide if there's merit to put this on the agenda for February's board meeting as an action item, if that's what we kind of come to the conclusion to after our discussion this evening. So
Can I just ask one more question about our slides? Can you just give me again a little more information about how the funding can assist with teacher recruitment and retention? Just kind of revamp that a little.
Yes, and I'll start through the lens, an anecdotal lens, because I was a Title I principal for 3 years.
And if you could also address,
yes,
because in my mind, that doesn't matter if it's a junior high or a high school or an elementary, it can be equally as effective. Correct. If that's what we're trying to do.
Yes, I'll preface by saying, gosh, the most inspiration, I think, anywhere to be found in our school district is in our Title I schools. Their students are every bit as bright and capable and have potential, yet with poverty correlates strongly with literacy and numeracy gaps. So me as a former principal of Granite Park, I had amazing teachers, and they are tasked with everything else our other amazing teachers do in Granite, but they have these extensive numeracy gaps and literacy gaps to close. And if they were tasked to do that without the additional resources of a paraprofessional in their classroom to help with small group instruction, or having the student receive additional help in tutoring and after-school programming or summer school programming, then the teacher's job would be so much more challenging, and they would feel more isolated without that support. So the recruitment and retention isn't buying them sweaters, and that's not what I mean. It's really providing them the supports to help close those gaps, because in absence of those supports, it would be much harder for a teacher to not burn out. I honestly believe it is harder for teachers in Title I schools to not burn out if some of those resources Title I provides aren't given.
Thanks.
Can't help myself here too, and I think it's important to name, in our system, we don't have short-term incentives. We don't have merit pay. We don't have bonuses for hitting benchmarks or certain achievements, right? So in our system, a lower class size is an incentive, a retention incentive. Additional adult support is a retention and recruitment incentive.
Thanks. That's really helpful.
All right, Connie.
I just want to say thank you for all the years that I've been here and to be able to finally see and narrow down and know that we can come with a purpose because of the work that you're doing is just such what school's all about and what we're supposed to be doing. And I just can't say thank you enough. I so appreciate what you're doing.
Board Member Bridges, thank you. I want to deflect that thanks to these good people on this slide. So the folks that have helped me in this presentation are in our Student Assessment Office, so my counterpart, Dr. Bramble, and her research analysts, Oyu and Kaylee, and then with financial data, my two wonderful secretaries, Sandra and Jana. They were integral to this presentation. So I'll pass along your thanks to them and this presentation we've done.
This was hugely helpful. And again, like overwhelming how much work you put into this. So thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to say thank you. This is wonderful. We haven't been able to put a finger on exactly what's best and what will work the best, but I think we're moving in the right direction. I know last year when this was brought to our attention, should we just go K-8 through 8 or do the high schools too? It was we wanted some time to be able to think about that and to be able to review these things, and I think that we've started that process and appreciate it. And the high schools kind of were put on notice that we're considering doing this, going K-8, and it's something that we're going to have to make a decision on. So I think the information has been good. I think it gives us information that we can make a decision on and take an action item on. And I think it's one, although we don't have all the answers, we have some more answers, and we'll get more as we go along. So I'm not opposed to it being an action item. And I have several schools on this list, both high school and elementary.
Yep.
So
I have a lot of my elementaries too.
thank you.
Can I make sure that it's clear to me what we're saying there? No decision is a decision to continue the current course. If we were to place it on the agenda, it could be an up or down vote, K-8 or no, or K-12. And I think that's what so you're not advocating for one position or the other. You're saying that this is something we ought to.
Do you need to make a decision?
Very good.
Let me ask a question to you, Aaron.
Yep.
I still feel like there's a ton of unanswered questions. And we're talking about correlation. We're talking about multiple variables, right? And at best, we're looking for correlation. And we never even got to causation, as I alluded to earlier. So if you had more time and more resources, what would you investigate further? How would you go about, not necessarily how you would go about, but what are the outstanding questions that you wish you could still answer to bring more clarity to us?
So this experience, which, the research taking several months, it was highly reminiscent of conducting my research for my doctorate degree with Rick as my dissertation chair. And it brought back a little PTSD. What I learned in my doctorate degree was when it comes to education, there's very few roads that lead you down to cause because it's so complex. And so that was reaffirmed here. When we come to, all these different factors, the thing that impressed me was, well, it's not about the money. And so that provides my department a lot of future discussion on, well, what is it about, right? So what things do we need to focus on with principals? How do we support schools prior to giving them allocations? But that's not the question you asked about, high school funding, right? Future areas, I can't, I've been working on this since June. I don't know that there's future areas that will yield, future areas of research that will yield more answers than what we've given. I think the only other information I could offer is kind of that longer version of, well, I said that there's no correlation, and here's why. And then there, I could say this is the data, which was fairly exhaustive in saying this conclusion. So I guess I could share more breadth and depth, but I think the conclusion, even with more time, would be the same, that we end on correlation only, unfortunately.
Let me ask perhaps a similar question, but differently. Aaron, prior to you coming into this position, we'd had 10 turnaround schools. And board members, this will sound familiar perhaps. In the 3 years that those 10 schools were on turnaround status, they all received very similar spoonfuls of castor oil. The treatment the 10 schools received was very similar. But looking at student achievement outcomes, even though they'd received very similar treatment, there were very different outcomes. There was one school, South Kearns, you'll recall, that shot upwards in terms of achievement. There are some, and then actually we had a pretty good bell curve. We had one school that plummeted down, and the others that did various, and so we started, really this was the genesis for the position that you hold, Aaron, because so we've got to figure out why, when these schools in trouble all get the same treatment, do they have these different outcomes? And we learned a lot as we've looked at that over the last couple of years about leadership, about culture, about attitudes and so on. And much of this has been reaffirmed, and then our position in the district strengthened with our work with the Bush Institute in terms of leadership, not just the principal, but also all forms of leadership throughout a school. It strikes me that this is a very similar phenomenon, a very similar problem, because we're giving the same treatment, in this case money, and having varied outcomes, sometimes counterintuitive outcomes. It's clear that needs to continue to be studied. It doesn't, this very important pursuit does not answer the question that the board had asked us to come and discuss today, which was, is it better to spend our resource in high schools or to spread that out either more richly or more broadly in the K-8 schools? And so I just bring us back around. That was really, board, what you asked us to come back in January of 21 to report on. But the pursuit of that has clearly highlighted crucial questions that we need to answer for our system, and really that aren't being answered in education more broadly. Rick, you're starting to.
I can't help but chime in too. I personally too, having experienced this and having like you said, watched the turnaround experience. The factors in human capital are what personally I believe what makes a difference in student achievement is the skill and the will of their teacher. The teacher in the classroom, and the skill that teacher has, and the dedication and the will. And so to start pulling at that thread, you start having to look at human capital management things, recruitment and retention, employee engagement, leadership, culture, all of those things. Unfortunately, those things are quite the research projects. They're very hard to quantify, hard to measure. And so rather than saying, look, this is the best program, this is the best basal, this is the best device, this is the best, we're more inclined to really look at the human capital side of the teacher in the classroom and those principles that influence that teacher's abilities, professional learning, etc., performance management.
Can I ask a follow-up question regarding that? Is there a consensus or a takeaway that you obtained that would suggest that at the secondary level, or I guess I should say at the high school level, that a high school is better equipped because of the nature of a high school and the structure of it, that it's better able to target those students who need the attention most versus at an elementary school level? Does that question make sense?
Yes, I think so, and I'll answer it kind of in a strange way, and you can revisit that if I don't get there. One piece that the superintendent noted was that the same castor oil treatment and the variance. Another thing that really sticks out to me is the size of school can influence the swing in student achievement, meaning if we are a small school, let's look at small schools. If we are a small school and we have some really struggling teachers, that can really sink us because we are really small. Or if we are a really small school and we have some really high achieving teachers in terms of the measure, we're huge. So our swing can be really enormous depending on our size. The high school is quite large, so it absorbs that swing. It's really hard for them to see giant swings in achievement. It didn't get as granular as I think you're after, Clark, but I don't have a great answer for that.
Yeah, and that is an answer. If there's not a takeaway, that's okay. I'm just curious if there was one, if there's a belief or some indication one way or the other that a student can be more targeted or more emphasized, more remediated, if you will, even at a high school versus at an elementary school.
I'll insert a thought, not a conclusion, but if an elementary school was going to invest some of their Title I allocation in extended day kindergarten, they really have that student as a captive audience in increasing their duration of learning, right? Whereas some, not all of the strategies in a high school, whether it's after school programming or other things, they don't have quite the same captive audience as an elementary does. And so that speaks to, I think, part of your question in the efficacy. We've talked about the gestation of a investing resource in younger children, that if you catch them earlier, then likely that they'll carry that closed reading gap or numeracy gap with them through their whole life. But the nice thing about elementary is, I suppose, you have a captive audience, where high school you can offer many things, but it's hard to I was going to say capture them, but I don't want that on public record.
Too late. Maybe adding to that, Aaron, I'm trying to come up with the right words to say this. High schools, because of their size, inherently have more options for kids, Title I or not. A high school has many more educational options than does an elementary school.
Correct.
Regardless of whether or not they have Title I funds. Elementary schools just don't have the flexibility in terms, elementary schools can't individualize for students the way high schools can, because of the breadth of options and opportunities that are present at a high school that are just not structurally present at an elementary school.
Correct.
And I think that cuts both ways, right? I mean,
Yep.
All right, Nicole.
So I had strong feelings about this last time. I just want to reiterate, I understand what you're asking, Clark. This was something that was really, I just kept thinking about it when we talked about it a year ago, and I was talking to a friend who is an administrator, and I asked her opinion on it, and she pulled out this book that she was taking a class, and she pulled out the statistic, and she said it takes 15 minutes a day of one-on-one time to get a kindergartner to catch up, being one grade level behind. It takes, by the time they're in sixth grade, it takes an hour and a half of one-on-one time. So is it better? I mean, to me, that's a huge statistic. We're going to have to do so much intervention. And I can't help but think of, we had a ninth grader that transferred into our school, and I was talking to the English teacher about her, and she said, we finally figured out what the problem was. She can't read. So by the time they're in ninth grade, if they can't read, they have lost, you're expected to read by third grade. You have lost fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, and ninth grade. So identifying them early and doing those interventions early, to me, is the most valuable, because that is where it counts the most. If they don't have it, I don't know what happened to her. By that time, if you can't read, what incentive do you have to go to high school? And that's a statistic that, like I say, while graduation rates are good to involve in that, they're not even there to be part of that statistic. So to me, it's so important for us to identify these kids. And I know poverty doesn't stop, and you're right, people do move in, and they come in at different times, and we are still working with English language learners and different people as they move in. But as far as the overall, where is it better? To me, that statistic, that thing that she told me was huge. That's like, okay, that's a big deal. 15 minutes a day versus an hour and a half a day. Where's the intervention going to happen, and where is it most valuable to happen? To me, it's in the younger grades. So I'm right there. The FTE, like you were saying, Dr. Bates, is more flexible in the secondary. They can pay a teacher to, they can sell their prep and work 7 periods or 8 periods or whatever. They have a lot more flexibility with that. But in elementary school, they don't have that flexibility. And not only that, but as your question pointed out, the elementary schools have very few resources as far as funding goes, whereas a high school, like I say, has almost $1 million to be able to work with in that flexibility. So I'm there with Terry. I think this is something it's true. I know we did that because we didn't want to pull the rug out from underneath the Granger. But I feel like we need to do what they're recommending, that the earlier you provide the intervention, what he said here, the earlier you provide the intervention, the more time the resources come to fruition. So to me, that's where it's important for us to focus that funding and put the money.
I appreciate that. I'm not sure where I land at this point, but I guess one question I have with respect to more so to Cottonwood than versus Granger, because Cottonwood just began being a Title I school, is there any consideration we ought to give to investments that have been made? I guess I should call them initial investments that have been made that might take 2 or 3 or 4 years to play out, rather than cut funding the very next year on programs or initiatives that had a longer horizon than that?
Right. And you're correct that any investment we made with that funding this year, we won't see come to fruition yet, right? There's no data to speak one way or another. And a small answer to the question, that for certain investments that Cottonwood has had, when a Title I school invests some of their money in things like technology, well, federal laws is at least gracious enough to say, you know what, if you are declassified as a Title I school and those needs remain, even though federal funding is, you can keep those tangible resources that you use. So there's at least, if funding is taken away, there's at least that benefit, but you were correct in some, any additional, anything else like the teachers or whatever, that would revert back to what they had the year prior before funding, right?
Well, and can I add, and I know Chris wants to speak next, but when last year, we did put Cottonwood and Granger on notice that we would be revisiting this. So I don't think the admin at Cottonwood, I don't think there was any doubt that, hey, here, you're going to participate for a year in this, but we are going to take a serious look in the next year. So
Yeah, I don't think my question or concern was regard to any surprises to the administration. It's more of, did we waste the money
the investment
last year?
Right.
And so I'm a believer in the principle, if there's a sunk cost, then don't throw more money after it. But if there's a reason to not cut that off, so that's why I asked the question, is are there certain programs or certain things that were implemented that need to be seen through, versus if they're
Understood.
cut, then that initial investment was potentially wasted.
Understood.
Yeah, basically.
All right, Chris.
So my question kind of just went right along with that. What you kind of already almost just answered was, if there's programs in place, can we give them a year to transition, I guess is the right word, to use that program, but not to just abandon it totally? Or, is there any room is this all K through 8 straight is what we're wanting to vote on? Or can we look at, do you Do you know what I'm trying to say? Are we trying to just vote K through 8, or are we just trying to say either we're going to do high school and K through 8? I mean,
You're
I-
saying
I need to know
what's the motion going to
what's the
say?
motion's going to say? Yeah.
Well, it could be different motions, but Martin already said if we do nothing, then we're going to continue on the path we're already on because we don't need to reapprove a plan that's already in place, okay? So a vote, an action item would need to be done if we say, you know what, we are going to decide to allocate more money to our elementary schools. We're going to remove the high schools from our Title I plan, this funding plan. And then even with that, let's say we did choose that, even with that, then we get into a discussion of, do you want to increase the PPA, that per pupil allocation in our existing K-8 elementaries? Or do you want to add another, I think the slide said we could do up to 5 to 7, or, I mean, as a board, we could do 3. I mean, we would take a hard look at those, the amount of elementaries that you add. The more you add, obviously, the lower the per pupil allocation goes. And then we could have discussions on, okay, what is that? What is too low to make any kind of difference? And so you have to factor that too. An important part with these discussions too, I know Cottonwood and Granger are kind of under the radar because they're the 2 high schools and everything like that. But remember, I just want a reminder that the role of the board is to always look at what is best for the whole district. I know we're elected on our individual precincts and we need to answer to those constituents, but what is best for the district is always something that we have to have in the back of our minds as well. I saw a hand. Was it you, Terry?
And I just think we have to realize, as you were saying, on the horizon, we have more high schools coming. So if we perpetuate that, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong either, but we have to say if we perpetuate that and keep high schools on and we bring more high schools on, it waters down the amount of money for the future. So I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but I think we do need to make a decision.
Right, Julie.
I agree. I think that we need to readdress our strategy on Title I spending, and that we need to vote on that. I think it needs to be on our agenda for next month. And as far as I look at it, I think that we're really looking at, are we going to take a strategy of prevention or of treatment? That's kind of what I see this issue as.
I wrote on my paper, is it prevention early or intervention later?
Yeah.
The
Can I
Oh, sorry.
and I think as we pull ourselves out of the schools individually and just look at this as a strategic decision, when we look at it in terms of philosophy like that, I think it will help us, because right now we're looking at specific, unique situations and where where is Cottonwood and where's Granger spending their money right now? What programs will they lose? But this is a longer term decision. And so it can't be made based on what is happening right now in these schools or where are they spending their money right now. It has to happen based on strategy, really.
And our vision of what that Title I funding plan is going to look like for years to come.
Can I ask what the rationale was 6 or 7 years ago when Granger was brought in to be a Title I school?
Great question.
That was before my time.
I'm old and forget.
I could semi-answer that, but superintendent obviously was much closer to it at the time. Granger High is arguably the most at-risk school in the state in terms of high school and poverty levels or socioeconomic status. And we're really struggling in a lot of ways, and we're looking at ways to increase funding to offer more supports. And the conversation came up around looking to feeders as a solution to provide more funding to Granger, rather than just running off of the regular free and reduced lunch.
funding was a piece of the there had been a change in administration. There's change and it was, we've laughed sometimes where we talk about the Nerd-Welburn disruption model, where the best way, really our experience is the schools, this is hard to say, the schools where we take all of the teachers and the administration and place them elsewhere and bring in a new principal and have them interview and post for everybody, every position in the school, brand new. That kind of shock and awe seems to have the greatest impact in terms of positive impact. And that doesn't mean, I'm not saying that the teachers and the administration who were there previously were poor, but there needed to be a real shakeup. And that real shakeup seems to have the greatest positive results. And so Granger High we were very worried about Granger High School and its direction. You saw the high school graduation rate of 58%. I mean, that was when this was very early in my tenure. It was the building was almost complete, and we said, let's do a bunch of things really hard. Now, there was another grant, not a Title I grant. I want to say, was it a SIG grant or a CSI? Was it a SIG grant? And the brand new principal at the time, Jerry Haslam, had been spending that money in some very targeted ways. Granger High made AYP for the first time ever. No, really, it was and we were bringing them into a new school. We were bringing the ninth grade in. We were putting this together. We had a nearly brand new faculty, and Jerry Haslam came to the district and said, you know what, the SIG grant is about to run out. Is there any way we can maintain this trajectory of what we're doing? And we worked and dug and said, you know what, we can make you a Title I school. We need to do these couple of things, jump through a couple of hoops. I'm making it sound really easy, but it was protracted. and then as the SIG grant phased out, Title I phased in, and we were able to maintain some things. And I think it's been a really good run. I think we've made a lot of changes. I think there's been a lot of development, a lot of investment in the human capital that Rick's been talking about. And it's been a good thing. The argument at the time you saw on the board is that poverty doesn't go away when you turn 14 and go to high school. And that carried the day. That phrase carried the day. And we moved forward, and that was the rationale at the time.
Just want to make sure I understand something that Terry commented on, which was the potential for future dilution if another high school is added. So it sounds like there's a fair amount of flexibility, however, as to where you hit those breaks and those thresholds of adding another high school. So
Well,
what would that threshold be, and when would you foresee another high school, whether it's Hunter or Kearns or whoever it may be, that they would be potentially added?
Good question. Again, there's essentially 2 points of flexibility that we have within the federal guidelines to determine determine who gets served. So we rank every school in the district according to poverty, and we start with number 1, and we decide where we cut it off. So, in partial answer to your question, we could extend that list and dilute quite far, but that doesn't seem to be the answer. So we could peel it back and kind of decide, where does it make the most sense? Where are we getting the best return on investment? But then the second point of discretion we have is saying, well, those high schools creep in, that another high school will add to that list if we continue to use this projected feeder pattern, this rarely used option. So when will that come? It kind of, there's some variance year to year, and each year we need to do a little bit of soul searching if the rank order changes slightly. So it just depends. And in the short answer, it really just depends.
But if we continue with this and a school becomes available, a high school fits into that, we have to bring them in, right?
If we want to maintain that same number of schools served in rank order, then yes. Or you could say, nope, we're going to not serve the elementary that it jumped. And so we say, sorry, elementary, you're no longer a Title I school because we don't want to serve. So those are the types of decisions we make when we choose where we cut off that rank order.
It's not cut and dry. There's discretion, is what you're saying.
Yeah, those there's some discretion.
No, there's absolute discretion. We could choose to serve 3 schools.
Yeah.
and put all $9 million into 3 schools. Or we could put all $9 million into you used 49 schools.
Right.
Right, because there is a rank order of poverty.
Correct.
So we could just serve the 3 most highest poverty schools, or we could serve up to the 49 highest poverty schools, which is 50% of our district. So we have absolute discretion there.
We make that year to year.
Right.
We make that decision.
But if we say we're going to serve schools down to 60%, then we got to serve everybody in that 60%.
Right.
We don't have that. We can draw the line where we want to draw the line. But if we need the money, if we suddenly need another $700,000 or $800,000 because the demographics at a high school in a community have changed such that school now becomes eligible under our criteria,
Right.
then the choice that we have, it's not discretion anymore, it's the choice that we have, is either cut schools off the bottom so we have more money to fund it, or dilute the amount of money and maintain the same number of schools. Am I seeing that right?
Yes.
And can you repeat for me then, what is the current policy? What is
our internal in Granite is 60%,
It is
right around there.
60%. Okay.
When they reach that threshold of free lunch.
Okay. So that's also an option the board could consider, is just to
Yes.
change
Yep.
what that policy is of
It used to
how
be
that threshold is
70%, and that was 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we said, you know what, let's go down to 60. And what that did was add 5 schools into the 7 schools, something into the mix.
Right. That's correct.
If I might say something, I represent Granger in my area, and several years ago, we had some issues, like you said. I think the steps that were taken have helped benefit Granger. I think the human capital and those that are working there and doing those things now are at a point, whether the money continues or not, that school will continue to succeed. I honestly believe that. I think we took steps to help them. I think those have helped, and I think they'll continue, their trend will continue to go up. Doesn't mean they're a perfect school, but I believe in Granger High.
It's interesting. A year ago, after we had this conversation, I was picking up my then 6th grader at my neighborhood elementary, and the principal happened to be out there in the drive-through, right? Because I was pulling up to pick up my girl. She was on safety patrol, so it's really nice when it's not as crowded and you pull up a little bit later. But the funny part is that I kind of waved to her, and she just got in my van. And I was like, come on in. And she just looked and she said, what on earth are you guys thinking about reducing our, she was way nicer than that. But it was basically, why did you decide to keep high schools on when it's really, really diluting the money to where she didn't feel like she was able to, this is a Title I school, she didn't feel like she had enough funding to really move the needle in any direction because of the board's decision. And at the time, at this time last year, I wasn't against necessarily putting it to elementaries. The problem I had last year was the absolute sudden pull out the rug from under Granger High's feet, because I didn't realize coming into that discussion that that's really what we were being asked to do. And I just didn't feel like the timing was there, which is, I mentioned to Clark earlier, they've been put on notice. That actually does give me a little peace and comfort knowing that they know that this is coming up. This is not going to be the rug out from the carpet like it would have been a year ago at this time. So that just really, I explained that to her. She was very gracious. She listened. She understood my perspective. I understood her perspective. It was a good conversation, but it just really, that conversation has stuck with me, that it was too diluted. And this was a school of about 450 kids. So not a small elementary, but definitely one that felt the impact of that lower per pupil allocation. So I just wanted to share that. And this school feeds into Granger High. This is a Granger Network school.
So did you take her home?
No, she had her own ride. She doesn't live in the neighborhood anyway, but no, she was, and she's, she's a phenomenal principal. She knew how to work miracles and write extra grants and find all those things to make her school a successful one. And she's not there anymore. She is actually in the district now, but she's on a slide. I saw her name.
I saw her name on the slide too.
I saw her name, Dr. Joan Bramble. But that really had an impact on me after having just said, okay, let's get through this year and see where we are. So I remember that conversation as we revisit this today.
So have we given enough direction as a staff?
Certainly, I think we'll have an action item on next month. I'll talk with board leadership about it some more. The question then, really there's a yes/no question that's asked first. And then the question is, do we continue funding to the high school? And if the answer to that is no, then the next question is, do we leave the allocation to elementary schools as is and add additional elementary schools? Or do we give the current K-8 schools, I said elementary, the current K-8 schools more higher per pupil allocation, or do we do a mix of the two? What Karen just articulated would not be addressed if we simply added the number, if we added the 5 to 7 elementary schools but left the per pupil allocation the same. That wouldn't resolve the concerns that had been articulated by the principal who got into her van.
Chat.
I'm sure, but let us work with board leadership on how best to articulate the questions, to present them to the board, so that you'll be able to answer that. You'll be able to answer that for us. We've told you before, we'll implement what it is you direct us to implement, but let us formulate the best way to ask those, to present that question to you, so you'll be able to present the question and also the underlying information that you feel you're going to need to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, and that's what I was just going to ask for, is it would be really helpful to know if we did add 1, 2, 3 schools, however many, what are those schools? And then by adding each additional school, what is the effect on that per pupil allocation? Because that data is going to help us if we even get to that point in the conversation, right? But we've got to have that at our fingertips, because that would, I think, help all of us be able to look at maybe what direction we wanted to go with that, and have actual numbers to help us make a good decision.
Just to add to that, sorry, I think Mitch estimated, I don't know if we have numbers, but he estimated what it was last year. I don't know if you can have an estimation, but that would be great too, as long for next year.
Julie, do you have a question?
I think too that if we know what those next schools are, that's still just a temporary list, right? That order could change from year to year, so we have to remember that's still a temporary thing for each school.
And I do. What you said earlier, you articulated it so well. We're picking a strategy, a forward-thinking strategy. So it is helpful to have data and know what schools are next. And I think besides what schools are next, I think what I mainly am concerned about with is the number of schools, I think, is a more important data point to look at, because I think we do, once again, as board members, we have to consider the whole system. What is good for the whole system? What is our strategic vision with this Title I funding? What does our plan look like? And so thank you for that making me think of that clarification. Maybe just a number of schools in relation to what does that do to the per pupil allocation, because I do think we have to be careful to get too low. Did you have another comment or question?
I'm just thinking that it also, you hate to look at individual schools versus the per pupil spending, because if you start saying these 4 schools, then you can start saying how much population, how many students that is versus, and you hate to start like pigeonholing yourself into a number when that number is going to change from year to year also. So we have to look at it all knowing it's a ballpark.
Yeah.
And that's
for
where it's
sure.
so crucial for the board to set the strategy,
Yeah.
and then let us
Yep.
implement that, and the details and the pieces fall where they do.
But I do think if the per pupil's $800 or $1,000, I think that does reflect on our decision on how
Huge.
many schools to add, right?
Completely,
Yeah.
yes.
All right, board
you.
members, any other questions? Good discussion. Thank you, Erin. If you'll take back our thanks again, once again,
Yes.
to your whole team.
Very
And to
good.
Joan.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Joan.
Thanks, you guys.
All right, we will turn the time over to Martin for his superintendent report.
Thank you. I have three things this evening. First, and this may be on other people's lists as well for your reports, the State School Boards Association Conference is this Thursday and Friday, and it's virtual. Stacy, did everybody get this? Oh, good, very good. So Thursday is a speaker. We have set up the back two rooms.
We're not coming in Thursday night.
You're not coming in Thursday night. Never mind. So Friday,
But we are Friday.
unless, well, how much chocolate would, okay, so you'll be able to watch the keynote speech from the location of your choice on Thursday. So it doesn't matter what room we had reserved, we're good there. Friday, though, there are three breakouts, but they're not really breakouts. There's three sessions, and everybody goes to the same session. And we will be, we have a room set up upstairs in the other building. Come here to my office, and we'll all go over there together and go through those sessions. And then I believe we'll be having lunch afterwards. And I think there's an email that will be coming from Stacy about lunch to you shortly. So that's,
Can you check with Zions Bank if they can have the peanuts for us?
if they could move that over. Let me see what I can do about that, but probably not. I'm sorry. The second, board members, this is a little bit lengthy, and I apologize for that, but I know most, if not all of you, have been receiving some correspondence regarding the sex education curriculum. And it's really not the curriculum, it's the instructional materials. And so I apologize for the edge-of-speak here, but the distinction here is actually significant. Curriculum is the technical definition of curriculum, a structured set of intended learning outcomes. The State Board of Education in the state of Utah establishes the curriculum, meaning the standards and objectives for every course that's taught in the state. Instructional materials are the textbooks, the worksheets, the software, the things that we often think of colloquially as being the curriculum, but they're really not the curriculum. The curriculum is the standards and objectives. Now, in many cases, the State Office of Ed, formerly State Office of Education, now the State Board of Education staff, will review and recommend even different instructional materials, whether it's this text, that text, the other text. And as a district, when our math textbook needs renewal, and actually we've got all of our subjects on a rotation for when we buy the texts, because there's a lot of buying power when we do an adoption for 5 years or something, whether that's physical texts or electronic text. And so we'll have committees. We have committees with parents and teachers and usually the curriculum specialist to head the committee to review what materials best align with the standards and objectives, with the curriculum, with the actual curriculum. And then we'll also look which are going to be most helpful for special education students, English language learners, and so on. And that's really how selections of instructional materials are made, again, on a rotation basis. Now, this will probably not come as a surprise to anyone, but in Utah, sex education is its own special category. It's got its own special law on how the instructional materials are selected. The State Board of Education has not changed the curriculum for the sex education curriculum. The standards and objectives are the same as they have been, and I don't think there's any appetite on the State Board to review those. But each year, they review to some degree materials and approve those to go out to the districts and say, here, here's some new materials that are available. They're approved. Select them if you choose. Now, we have, again, under the law, then there's a much more prescribed process for selecting materials that deal with the sex education curriculum. And it involves committees, it involves a public posting of the materials, public review, and so on. All of which is to say, the State Board of Education passed through some new sex education materials this year. Our committee, which is made up of parents and teachers and others as required, has been reviewing those and even made those available to the public for comment. It's in this period that I think many of you started getting emails from some groups. It's interesting to me that they're here rather than at the state, because if these hadn't been passed through the state in the first place, we would never have seen them. In any event, our committee has it's a committee that's run out of the curriculum department, reports to Rick. Rick has shared with me at this point the curriculum does not recommend adopting any new materials. We're comfortable with the materials that we have to teach the sex education core that the state curriculum that the state has adopted. We don't feel the need to add to those at this point. Consequently, you will not be seeing on your agenda anytime soon the adoption of new sex education materials, which is part of the requirement. You don't typically see adoption of new math materials. You would see a contract to buy new math materials, but you wouldn't see the adoption that would generally happen with sex education materials. So we don't anticipate, the committee looked at those, said this isn't something that we need to include in our portfolio, and have moved on. Are there any questions to that? Because I know you all got emails. I don't know that all of you got emails. I know a number of you got emails. Okay. My third point, final point, board members. In 1986, I had my first opportunity to dip my toe into the educational profession. I became a paraprofessional at the Spafford School, which was part of the adolescent psychiatry ward at LDS Hospital. With a couple of brief interruptions, I've been blessed to be part of this, the greatest of professions since then, with nearly 26 years with Granite School District. Earlier this evening, I let the Board of Education know that I will be retiring at the end of the school year. I'm going to cry. I don't do that. Thank you, Karen. Effective July 1st, 2021, which will give the board time to conduct a search and go through a selection and appointment process and have some transition time with my successor if that's desired. Of course, I expect to be fully engaged the next few months, but I do acknowledge that I expect that the months will pass quickly as the last 35 years seem to have gone. I said it a moment ago, I'll say it again, there is no greater profession than our education profession, and I've been blessed to serve in it, and only more so in this year of so many difficulties and challenges. There's no better place to be than here in Granite School District with these wonderful, committed educators and those who support those educators, whether they're board members, foods, grounds, transportation, office, custodial, or other professionals. Here of all places, all work together to serve the children, and I could not be more honored than to be and to have been a part of this great district. So that's my report.
Thank you, Martin. I think the board doesn't really know how to feel. We're kind of just sad right now. Change is hard. Change is the only constant in life. And so we wish you well, but please know that you'll be missed. So we look forward to, we still have you for 6 months. And so we look forward to those 6 months with you. All right, board members, we're going to go into our board reports. Terry, let's start with you.
Nothing other than the fact tonight's been delightful. Welcome the new board members. enjoyed the opportunity to visit with you and get to know you a little bit personally, and also to hear your great comments, and look forward to working with you. And I'll save my comments for Martin in June, I guess. But,
There you go.
thank you, Martin, for all you've done for our district.
Martin, that was the most beautiful resignation I think I've ever heard. That was really well written. I was really touched over the holiday. Olympus High's principal lost his wife over the holiday, and the showing of love to him was pretty astounding from the Olympus community. They brought over 2,000 luminaries to represent each student, and he stood and as people came and wished him well, and it was just a really beautiful thing to see all these students out on their winter break, putting luminaries all over the campus, and they also raised a pretty nice little fund for him. And it just made me think about all the personal things that he's done that have touched people. And now in this personal moment, they wanted to personally do something for him. And it just raised my awareness to how personal education is. And that it's not, I don't know, we just impact each other's lives. And I got to watch Olympus High's, they had an online musical extravaganza for Christmas. And I thought it was so remarkable how they integrated both. They created a great opportunity for both our online and our in-person students to demonstrate what they had learned. And the teacher, Vicki Belknap, sent me an email back that I just wanted to read. She says, our wonderful choreographer taught some of those partner dances via Google Meets during the quarantines, attempting to guide them while dancing with a mannequin she owned for sewing purposes. The students were placing their arms around imaginary partners. It was inspiring to watch. Oli Broadcasting team, under the direction of their extraordinary teacher, Kirk Miller, managed to film the Monday night versions and edit and add Wednesday's shows. And again, very personal, right? Someone in their home using their own mannequin to try to show kids how to dance. And I just think that these personal things that we do, the way that we show compassion, the way that we show humanity is really important right now, and especially here at the end of the term, as I just also received 2 days ago, this text from some students. Hi, Mrs. Jackson. This is an anonymous text. I don't know who it's from. Hi, Mrs. Jackson. This message is sent from a group of students. As I'm sure you've seen in your time teaching at Skyline, keeping up in classes is extremely difficult considering the situation we are all in right now. Everyone is incredibly stressed, and many of us are failing classes. We asked around for what would help relieve pressure on students, and almost everyone has spoken on pass-fail being the best alternative. If needed, we can collect a list of students to help you. Please, please, please argue in our favor. I loved it that our students knew that they could have a voice and could be heard with me. And while I'm not here to advocate for a pass-fail system here or feel that that is our role to create that for our teachers at this time, I think that this really points to the importance of compassion, because these students are having a really hard time. And I just want to advocate that parents have compassion on their kids for their grades. And I'm speaking to myself too, because my kids' grades are the worst they've ever been. And that teachers have compassion in their grading this week. That if they can see that a pass will help instead of a C-, just try to have some humanity and make the best decision for your student. But err on the side of compassion. And we all should have compassion for our teachers, and our students could have compassion for their teachers. So I just think that we need to recognize that things are a little more personal than they have been. And especially here at the end of this semester, I think compassion needs to be the ruling principle. And that is, God, it was like a soapbox. My first board review soapbox.
Thanks, Julie. You did great. Nicole.
I wanted to say welcome to Clark and Julie. I'm so excited to be able to work with both of you and get to know you better. I just wanted to mention as well, Steve's wife was a good friend of mine for, I've known her for a long time. And it has been very heartwarming to see the Olympus community and how they have reached out and what they have done for Steve and his family. So appreciate the Olympus community and pass that on if you get to go visit any of them. But I had the opportunity to, it was Connie Swansong. She said she wanted to go visit Kearns, and I said, okay, let me call Principal Lou. So we went over there, visited her right before the break, and it was amazing to visit with her. They did, I don't know, I'm sure you all are aware, but they did the test to return, was it 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks before the break? And to talk to her and to ask her how it went and what they did and how it was for the community. And it was just phenomenal. She's a phenomenal woman. I don't know if you guys know her, but she just had everything set up and ready to go. And the way that they did the test to return and had the kids come in and tested them and got them through, she just, I mean, it was a well-oiled machine. And it was very encouraging to talk to her and see how they did it and how successful it was for them. And I asked her how it was for their community. I said, how, you know, what was the response and she said it was great. It was phenomenal for them. So I appreciated that visit with her and her example in that, I think, was really encouraging as we go into this test to return. I did get a chance to see Mamma Mia at Hunter and Joseph at Cottonwood High School, and both were just phenomenal performances. And I know Cottonwood did choose to do it with masks on, and I was worried because I thought, oh no, are they gonna be muffled? And they weren't, and they did an amazing job, and I was so proud of them. And same thing, Mamma Mia, they did not, they had masks on behind the stage, and then they took them off when they came on. They did the tests, they made sure that they were all COVID-free, and it was just, you know, kind of that, again, that thing of what Karen said about the Taylorsville Madrigals, that it's nice to be able to see how we can successfully operate and do these things in a safe way, but be able to bring something like that is just, it's so much fun for the students. It was fun for me sitting in the audience, but it's so much fun for those students, and to have that opportunity and to be able to participate. I just applaud those directors, and I know there's other directors who've done other shows. So, and the Madrigals and everything that everybody's done to make this year meaningful and something that the kids can enjoy. The sports programs that are going on, you know, it's so much of what the kids have lost, and I appreciate those teachers and those coaches who have really gone out of their way to do that.
Connie.
All right, I just want to say welcome to our new board members. There's 3 of us that have been here longer than 5 years, and so it's amazing to have so many new ones. We haven't seen that for ever since I've been on the board. So thank you for your questions, for your comments tonight. Wow, just thank you. And we're sorry to see Martin say he's going to retire, but we will be grateful for the months that we have him. So thanks, that's it.
I just have, my list is almost complete because everyone's kind of said what I was going to say. So all my notes are kind of.
We'll start on that side next month.
Thank you, Karen. We need to go this way. So I just wanted to welcome Clark and Julie. I'm so excited to have you on the board and work with us. We're new, some of us, and learning together, and I love that. And then I just wanted to thank our board leadership, Karen, and now Nicole as our vice president, for being willing to take that role. It's a lot more work than just being a board member. And thank you for Connie for her role as VP. And then we just have really big shoes to fill for superintendency. So this is the most exciting year for me ever with school board, COVID, and all this great things. So thank you.
Thank you, each of you, for your warm welcome. I'm excited to work with you. I'm excited to get to work and to truly dig in. And thank you for indulging my questions already tonight. Martin, I look forward to shaking your hand when we can do so. I guess I want to close my remarks by saying, in addition to my thanks to all of you for your warmth and your welcome, there's a tremendous amount of compassion and mercy that's going on out in our communities. And so I appreciate Julie's bringing that up. And I would echo that is happening in many, many different nooks and crannies of our community. And I look forward to the opportunity to witness and observe more of that in this context. So thank you again.
Thank you, Clark. We sure do welcome Julie and Clark. We're happy to have them here, and as evidenced in tonight's meeting, they are ready to go. They made awesome comments, great questions, and we just are really and sincerely excited to have them join our team. And we feel like we are a team. We have each other's back. So I'm super proud of this board. We do get along, even when we disagree. I also had the chance to go to Hunter High's Mamma Mia, and it was fascinating to see how she did it. It's 25% capacity, and so everyone was spread out in the auditorium. She ran it for 2 weeks instead of the normal, 4 performances. She had a cast A and a cast B. I don't think that's what she called it, but anyway, 2 different casts, and so the leads for one night were ensemble the other night, which helped further reduce the size of the ensemble. Just super creative ways. And if COVID has taught us anything, it's how to get creative to do some, quote, normal things like concerts and plays and, madrigal singing and all those things, just in different ways, but still having great outcomes. I want to thank the board for their support and vote of confidence in having me remain board president for the next 2 years. That means a lot. The past 2 years, I have felt nothing but support, and I look forward to getting through a somewhat tough year with you guys as my allies and having my back. We have a busy year full of hard things coming up here as a school board. Martin just announced his retirement. Those are big shoes to fill. Connie, did you refer? No, Chris? Somebody over there said that. And timeline-wise, there is nothing, well, before I speak of timeline, there is not a more important assignment or job duty as a board member than to select the superintendent. That responsibility remains with the 7 of us. And while we can enlist help through the Utah School Board Association and some staff here at Granite, the decision remains with us. There's not a more important thing we do than to appoint a superintendent. And so we will be immediately starting, doing a lot of extra work over the next several months as we put together, first of all, the job description, those requirements, working through the interview process, the second interview process, those kinds of things. And so we'll be busy with that. So that's one hard thing. We have another hard thing called COVID. We're not out of the woods yet. I know there were a lot of people disappointed that the vaccine rollout didn't work as planned on January 15th. We promise we will get it to you as soon as we can, as soon as the state gives it to us. Unfortunately, we don't even have a projected date. We can't give something we don't have. But just so you know, we want to get it to you as soon as we can. That is the goal. We want to protect our employees. Another hard thing we have coming up this year, we have hired a company called Davis Demographics. They look at wide scope population data in relation to school populations. They are going to be coming this year with some data that we really have to take a hard look at. We have a lot of schools and we have a lot of small schools. And so they're going to be putting forth some data that are going to be driving some harder decisions. So it's going to be a challenging year, but I still always remain optimistic. We're going to get through this together. We do see a light at the end of the tunnel for COVID, and we're so grateful for that. We are grateful for our teachers who continue to work so hard. We appreciate all their work. I did fail to we do have, real quick as a recognition, we have Senator Kathleen Reeby back there. She snuck in, and I don't think we recognize our GEA, Mike McDonough, Michelle Jones. I know we have Carrie Johnson listening in, representing PTA, so sorry. I just forget to do the recognition sometimes. My bad. That is all I have. I just want to assure you, please give the board a few weeks to gather our thoughts and do a lot of the initial work it takes to get our ducks in a row, so to speak, working on this, on filling the superintendent job. It's a hard one, and so we want to make good decisions, and we want to do it in a timely manner, but not a rushed manner, because we want the best outcome there. So with that, that is all I have, and we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
We adjourn.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Thanks, you guys. Study session, 2 weeks. Data's demographic. That's exactly.
This was my husband.
Mirroring. Yeah, and I